We all know that feeling, right? Just wading through this flood of news, constantly trying to figure out what actually matters. It can be, well, pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's exactly why we're here. Welcome to the deep dive. We take a really focused look at specific information, aiming to bring you the sharpest, most crucial insights.
And today, our focus is squarely on something pretty significant happening right now. Europe's, well, accelerating rearmament efforts.
Yeah, it's a big topic. Our main source for this deep dive is a really interesting analysis from independent Turks. It's titled Avrupa'nın yeniden silahlanması. Harkamadan güçe giden zorlu yol.
Which translates roughly to Europe's rearmament, the difficult road from spending to power.
Exactly. And it paints a really fascinating picture.
So our goal for you today is pretty straightforward. We want to get past the headlines,
Yeah.
understand the real forces pushing Europe's military spending up.
And maybe more importantly,
Yeah, explore whether all this investment, this massive spending, will actually lead to, tangible military power. What are the key factors? What are the real questions we should be asking you?
okay, let's dive in then. The sheer scale, the money involved, it's hard to ignore.
Right. The article mentions a SEPRI report from April 2025 saying European defense spending hit, get this, $693 billion in 2024.
Wow. 693 billion.
Yeah. And that's a 16% increase from just the year before, the highest it's been since the Cold War ended.
16% in 1 year. That's huge. But it's not just the overall number, is it?
No, not at all. What's really telling, I think, isn't just the total jump. It's where the increases are sharpest.
Like Poland.
Exactly. Poland up 31%, Germany 28%, Finland 16%. Those are big percentage hikes. But then you have the sheer weight of spending from the bigger economies.
Germany, France, the UK.
Right. Their absolute spending power has a massive impact. It's that mix, rapid growth in some places, huge volume in others, that really shows the full picture.
Okay. So the obvious questions then are, well, why? What's actually sparking this spending surge across Europe?
What are the strategic reasons?
Yeah, the core strategic thinking. And, like the article's title hints, does just throwing money at it automatically mean a stronger military?
That's the crux of it, isn't it? It's about effectively turning those dollars or euros into actual capability, real military muscle.
Not just figures on a spreadsheet.
Precisely. And the article digs into this, identifying 4 key strategic drivers fueling this renewed military focus.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first one, and this definitely echoes a lot of recent discussion, is what they call the Trump factor and uncertainty about U.S. commitments.
Ah, yes. It's hard to forget the lead up to the 2024 U.S. election and, well, the anxiety it caused in Europe.
Definitely.
Yeah,
Trump's earlier comments about NATO being demode, as he put it.
right, and hinting he might not defend certain members.
And making burden sharing a real negotiation point. That rhetoric clearly stuck.
So the article suggests that this history, plus the possibility of similar policies returning, is a major driver.
Exactly. It suggests the spending isn't just about Russia, for instance. It's also kind of strategic hedging. Europe preparing itself for a scenario where those U.S. security guarantees might be, well, less certain.
Preparing for a potential ally void, as the article puts it.
That's the term they use.
Yeah.
Basically, Europe thinking about how it would manage on its own, just in case.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, like taking out an insurance policy. So what's the second major driver?
The second one is the Ukraine war and what the article calls the revaluation of conventional power.
The 2022 invasion really brought that home, didn't it?
It was a stark reminder, a really brutal one, that good old-fashioned conventional military strength still matters. A lot.
Because for years, the focus was more on asymmetric threats, right? Terrorism, cyber.
Exactly. And the war in Ukraine just laid bare these significant gaps in things like tanks, artillery, air defense systems, even just having enough ammunition ready to go.
And the article mentions how arms control treaties after the Cold War, like the CFE treaty,
The Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty, yeah.
led to big cuts in armored units, land forces across Europe.
Right. And suddenly, those downsized conventional forces are seen as absolutely vital again for deterrence.
So this raises a big question then. Are these huge investments we're seeing now in artillery, air defense, ammo production just a temporary fix for the Ukraine crisis?
Or is it something more fundamental? A lasting strategic shift in how Europe sees its basic defense needs. That's the key point the article raises.
A really crucial question. Okay, driver number 3.
The third one is the pursuit of strategic autonomy.
Right. That's a term essentially pushed by France that's been around for a while.
It has, but it seems to be shifting from a sort of theoretical goal to something more practical now.
How so?
Well, there's this growing push within the EU to develop ITAR-free defense systems,
ITAR free,
meaning systems free from U.S. international traffic in arms regulations, basically reducing reliance on American tech in the defense industry.
giving Europe more independence in its security decisions.
Precisely. It's about having fewer strings attached, technologically speaking.
And the article connects us not just to military stuff, but also economic security.
Absolutely. It's about boosting local production, securing supply chains, controlling critical technologies. It's really a blend of defense needs and industrial strategy.
Defense and economics intertwined. Okay, and the fourth driver.
The fourth key factor is linked directly to NATO itself.
Yeah.
NATO's new regional plans and Europe's responsibility.
So this is about changes within the alliance.
Yes. The new defense plans adopted at the NATO summits in 2023 and 2024 basically put more demands, more expectations on the European members.
So it's not just about reacting to outside threats, but also Europe needing to step up more within NATO.
Exactly. The article talks about an increased expectation for European nations to provide, high readiness forces, joint operational forces, particularly on NATO's eastern flank, to counter Russia.
Strengthening the collective defense posture.
Right. And there's this renewed talk about strengthening the European pillar within NATO. But for that to be real,
Requires investment.
big investments from Europe in things like command and control systems, military transport, intelligence capabilities, robust air defense. It's about Europe becoming a more capable, more reliable partner within the alliance structure.
Okay, so those are the four main strategic drivers behind the spending surge. Now, the article also looks at how the EU itself is trying to shape this, right, with specific strategies.
Yes, exactly. It focuses on two key documents that came out in late 2024. The European Defense Industrial Strategy, EDIS, and the Strategic Technologies for Europe platform, or STEP.
EDIS and STEP. These sound like the EU trying to provide some direction.
That's the idea. Moving beyond just individual countries doing their own thing towards more coordinated EU-level approach, especially spurred on by the Ukraine war.
So, EDIS first. What's the goal there? The article mentions Ursula von der Leyen.
Right, the European Commission president. She described the aim as creating a united European defense industrial ecosystem, moving away from today's fragmented market.
A united ecosystem. Sounds ambitious. What does that actually involve?
Well, EDIS has three main goals, according to the article. First, seriously boosting production capacity, especially for essentials like ammunition and key platforms.
Like tanks and planes.
Yeah, things like that. Second, setting up common ways to buy equipment together, harmonizing inventories so countries use more compatible gear.
Makes sense for efficiency.
And third, reducing that external dependence by really prioritizing those ITAR-free systems we talked about.
Building European tech.
Exactly. The hope is better industrial coordination and a stronger EU ability to respond quickly and collectively to crises.
Okay, and then there's STEP, the Strategic Technologies for Europe platform. What's its focus?
STEP is all about reducing Europe's reliance on others for critical defense technologies. It's more tech-focused.
Which technologies specifically?
The article mentions things like artificial intelligence, dominating the electromagnetic spectrum, advanced sensor systems, and cyber defense, promoting European production in these cutting-edge areas.
And is this just about being independent from the U.S.?
Not entirely, no. The article explicitly links this to broader tech competition, especially with China.
In areas like hypersonics, AI.
Quantum communication, things like that. So strategic autonomy here also means closing the tech gap with systemic rivals, not just lessening reliance on the U.S.
Got it. It's a global tech race, too. Now, how is all this being funded? EDIS and STEP sound expensive.
Right, and that's where the European Defense Industry Program, or EDP, comes in.
EDP, so that's the money mechanism.
Essentially, yes. It provides financial support for joint procurement deals and collaborative R&D projects.
Bringing countries together financially.
Yeah, the idea is to get the big traditional producers, like France and Italy, working together with the newer big spenders, like Poland and the Baltics, all under one financial umbrella. It's set to really get going in 2025.
But beyond the money and the industry, the article stresses there's a deeper political message here.
Absolutely. EDIS and STEP signal the EU's ambition to build its own strategic guidance capacity in defense, not just relying on NATO to set the direction.
So, not quite a European army yet.
No, the article's clear it's not that, not directly.
Yeah.
But it definitely shows an intent to create a more autonomous EU defense structure in decision-making, in production, and in its ability to react. More independent, more agile.
Which brings us to the overall picture of European security. The article uses a great analogy, the spaghetti bowl.
Huh. Yeah, it's a good one because it captures the complexity, doesn't it?
It really does, all these overlapping strands. It's not just NATO and the EU.
No, you've got bilateral defense deals between countries, regional groups like the Joint Expeditionary Force or JEF,
Ad hoc task forces for specific missions.
and then strategic partnerships with key countries outside the EU, like the US, UK, Norway, Canada. It's a real tangle.
So this spaghetti bowl, it gives flexibility maybe, but the article suggests it also weakens things.
That's the downside. It can weaken strategic coherence, the ability to have a single unified reaction.
Because it's not just about the institutions overlapping.
No, it's also different national goals, different priorities for defense spending, even different views on what the main threats are.
Can you give an example of that fragmentation?
Sure. The article points to the fact there are two competing projects for the next generation fighter jet
Right, the FCAS project. France, Germany, Spain.
versus the GCAP project, UK, Italy, Japan. That's a major division right there in the defense industry.
And different spending priorities, too.
Yeah, like France investing heavily in missile programs, while Germany is focusing more on its land forces. It shows a lack of fully unified strategic thinking.
And we shouldn't forget the non-EU players in this mix.
Definitely not. Norway chips in financially, Canada provides troops, and reinforces the transatlantic link.
And the UK, even post-Brexit.
Still hugely important.
Yeah.
Through NATO, through JF, its capabilities are crucial for European security.
So it really is this complex security ecosystem, as the article calls it. Adaptive, maybe, but messy.
Yeah, messy. Complicated decision-making, patchy coordination, and often weak strategic unity. That's the reality of the spaghetti bowl.
Which naturally leads to the big question of relationships, particularly across the Atlantic. The article sees this rearmament period as redefining partnerships, right?
Absolutely. It's not just about budgets. It's about rethinking political alignments, with NATO, the US, and the UK right at the center.
And NATO is still the bedrock.
Do the foundation, yes. Article 5, collective defense that remains crucial. But
There's a but.
there's a but. Europe still heavily relies on the US for some really critical things, high-end capabilities.
Like what specifically?
Strategic intelligence, big command and control infrastructure, air-to-air refueling, heavy airlift capacity. Europe doesn't have enough of that on its own.
So there's a tension there between wanting strategic autonomy and still needing U.S. help.
A definite tension. And then you layer on the uncertainty about future U.S. commitment.
Back to the Trump factor.
Back to that, yes. His past criticisms of NATO, the burden-sharing demands, questioning the commitment to defend all members. That creates risk. A risk of fracture.
So the current rearmament push isn't just about Russia.
It's also significantly driven by this uncertainty about whether the U.S. will always be there in the same way.
Yeah.
Hedging those bets again.
Okay, what about the UK's role in this? Outside the EU now, but still involved.
Very involved.
Yeah.
Even though they're excluded from EU defense projects post-Brexit, their influence remains strong through other channels.
Through NATO, primarily.
NATO is key, yes. Their source projection capability, intelligence assets, their nuclear deterrent, these are major contributions.
And regionally, too, like
Yeah.
in the Baltics.
Yes, through things like the Joint Expeditionary Force, JEF. The UK plays a big strategic role, especially in Northern Europe.
So the UK has this kind of two-track approach.
Seems like it. Deep ties with the US, obviously, but also keeping a hand in European defense industry stuff where it makes sense for them, like the GSAP fighter jet project with Italy and Japan.
And the article stresses their unique contributions.
Yeah, the nuclear deterrent and the Five Eyes intelligence network. Those are strategic advantages for the whole continent that go beyond just industrial collaboration.
And quickly, what about Norway and Canada? The article mentions them as silent participants.
Well, silent might be a bit strong, but maybe less visible than the big players. Norway contributes significant funding to European defense programs, even without being in the EU, and its role in Arctic security is growing.
And Canada.
Canada's really stepped up its engagement with Europe, especially with the uncertainty around U.S. policy. Deploying troops to the Baltics, supporting NATO missions, they're seen as a stable, committed transatlantic partner.
Okay, so a complex web of relationships. But the article then turns to internal European dynamics, specifically leadership. This sounds tricky.
It is. It argues that common defense goals aren't just held back by money or tech, but also by history and politics. The leadership question, especially regarding Germany, is a persistent hurdle.
Germany's Zeitenwende, its turning point strategy, increasing spending, That's seen with suspicion.
In some quarters, yes, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe. The article suggests that while Berlin is trying to be more active, its growing military potential triggers historical memories and concerns about dominance.
Even if Germany isn't explicitly trying to lead?
Right, its economic and industrial weight just naturally positions it as a leader. But it needs power by consent, and that consent isn't always readily given due to those historical echoes. It's a very delicate balance for Berlin.
And France. They're usually quite vocal about leadership.
France definitely continues to assert a leadership role. They have the nuclear deterrent, military presence in Africa, and they're the main drivers behind that strategic autonomy concept. Paris wants to guide EU defense policy.
But they face limits, too.
Yes. Difficulties coordinating effectively with Germany are a big one, and differing security priorities often get in the way. That idea of a Franco-German engine or dual leadership often stalls because they can't always agree on the threat or the right response.
So neither Germany fully takes the reins, nor can France completely drive things alone.
That's the picture the article paints. It's not a total vacuum, but more like mutual reservations about leadership bids. Everyone's a bit hesitant.
Making it hard to develop that quick collective reflex the article mentioned earlier.
Exactly. If you're uncertain about who's leading or in what direction, developing a shared reflex becomes very difficult.
This leads to maybe the most fundamental point the article makes, one that's often overlooked.
Where are the soldiers?
Exactly.
Yeah.
All this money, all this tech, can Europe actually find enough people to make it work?
It's a critical question. The article points out that in many European countries with professional volunteer armies, military service just isn't that attractive anymore, especially for young people.
Why is that?
A mix of factors, it suggests. Rising living standards generally, more focus on individual careers, maybe war feeling more distant for many societies.
So recruitment is getting harder.
Significantly harder in countries that got rid of conscription. Germany, Netherlands, Italy are mentioned. And even where they're talking about bringing back limited conscription, like Sweden, the article says that's not a quick fix for getting large numbers of trained troops.
And there's a deeper demographic issue, too.
Yeah, the simple fact of Europe's aging population. The pool of potential recruits is shrinking.
And worse in some places.
Particularly challenging in Eastern Europe, the article notes, due to migration combined with lower birth rates. That poses real long-term risks for defense planning.
So the stark message is, you can buy the weapons.
But who's going to operate them? That's the problem. Buying hardware is one thing. Training qualified people takes years.
And it's not just training, is it?
No, military capability also depends on things like troop morale, good support systems for soldiers and their families, how society views the military profession.
So just talking about tanks and budgets misses a huge piece of the puzzle.
A crucial piece. The article warns that without addressing the human element, societal commitment, personnel planning, training, this whole rearmament effort could end up being mostly about spending money without delivering a real increase in capability. Lots of shiny kit, but not enough people to make it count.
Okay, so pulling it all together then. Europe is definitely spending unprecedented amounts on defense, a historic shift.
No doubt about that. But the article's core argument is that turning that spending into genuine military power isn't automatic. It takes more than just money.
It needs strategic direction.
Political will, institutional follow-through.
Not just bigger budgets.
Right. Buying weapons sends a signal, sure, a deterrent signal. But making those weapons effective, that needs trained people, forces that can work together seamlessly, joint planning, real technological depth.
And the article argues Europe still has weaknesses there.
Significant weaknesses in many countries, both within NATO and the EU structure. Things like relying on the US for electronic warfare capabilities that kind of undercuts the whole technological sovereignty idea.
And the personnel issue we just discussed.
Or the leadership disputes. All these factors hinder Europe from becoming a truly cohesive defense actor despite the spending.
The article also briefly mentions Turkey's role.
Yes, makes the point that Turkey is a key geopolitical player, a major NATO military, capable of acting in its region. Europe can't ignore Turkey's security role, but it hasn't fully integrated Turkey into its own security structures either. It's another complex piece of the puzzle.
So the final picture is one of transition.
Definitely. Europe's security is in flux. Money is flowing, yes, but the real impact depends entirely on what that money buys and how it's used and integrated.
Buying tanks is one thing.
Turning them into real power requires strategy, not just industry. That's the bottom line.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear Europe's rearmament is, well, incredibly complex, full of these tensions.
Yeah, record spending, but huge strategic questions. Pushing for autonomy while still depending on the U.S. leadership squabbles.
Yeah.
And that massive challenge of finding the people. That's a lot.
Which leaves us with a final thought, really, for you, the listener. Beyond the eye-watering budget numbers, what will actually be the true measure of Europe's renewed military strength down the line?
And what will its role look like in this shifting global security picture? What does it all mean for you?
Something to definitely keep thinking about.
We really encourage you to keep following these developments. They're critical, and this story is far from over. Stay informed as European security continues to evolve.